Video game sequels are always a bit of a weird problem. Developers have to ride this impossible tightrope of providing more of the same while simultaneously giving players something new and interesting. If you never introduce new ideas, then the series gets stale, and if you shake up the franchise too much, it becomes disconnected from that original vision. Many people point to Metroid Other M as the most divisive entry in the series, but I don't think so. The level of rage levied towards Other M is immeasurable, and it far outweighs the mere whispers of those who defend it. When it comes to Metroid games, the entry that is easily the loudest praise with the loudest dissent has to be Federation Force. Oh, that can't be right. Oh, Fusion. Now that makes more sense. Hello and welcome. I am Zabraxi with a haircut. We did it, team. We made it to the back half of the Metroid franchise. Well, Metroid 3 basically perfected the Metroid formula and is considered by many to be one of the greatest games of all time. Metroid 4 now exists in this weird world. It exists post Symphony of the Night. Metroidvania is now a genre. It's a term that people know, and it's a style people expect. How in the world does a Metroid game exist now? Well, I guess there's one way to find out. Let's go! Metroid 4. It's kind of interesting to me that the original Metroid was on a home console, Metroid 2 on a handheld, Super Metroid on a home console again, and Fusion returns back to the handheld. And then Metroid 5 just kind of rolls out on a console handheld hybrid to just be that guy. While the Nintendo 64 came and went without any word of a Metroid title, the Nintendo GameCube was around and the hype and expectation was once again in full swing. The year was 2002, and what a year it was. Super Mario Sunshine, Jedi Outcast, Eternal Darkness, Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind, Medal of Honor Frontline, Legend of Zelda The Wind Waker, and Warcraft 3, my god! Despite a godlike year of video game releases, I mean Warcraft 3 came out for thrall's sake, what we didn't know was that we were also going to be getting a new Metroid game. Oh, wait a minute, did I say a new Metroid game? I'm sorry, we were gonna get 2 new Metroid games. Yeah, not only were we getting Metroid Prime on the GameCube, the series' first departure into 3D, but we were also going to get Metroid Fusion on the Game Boy Advance in the same year. Actually, let me correct myself, not the same year, mind you, the same month. Actually, no, I'm sorry. The same damn week! Metroid Prime and Fusion would drop within days of each other to what was probably the best week for Metroid fans in the history of the franchise. While Metroid Prime would essentially attempt to convert the Super Metroid design into the realm of 3 dimensions, Metroid Fusion set out to be a little different than what we would have expected. You know, just to be that guy. So when I started this retrospective series to prepare for Metroid Dread, I've got to be honest, this is the reason I did it. This game is the reason I made this whole series. While Metroid 1 through 3 does a lot with exploring the world and does a great job mechanically and sets up the lore of the Metroid franchise in really creative and subtextual ways, Metroid Fusion is so undoubtedly tied to Metroid Dread in so many important ways, and its narrative design is integral to that connection. So we're here. We finally made it. So let's tackle Metroid Fusion.
Why are you like this? You're better than this. That was the joke you came up with? Really?
Vanilla World of Warcraft set the world to be explorable and enigmatic. While bits of quest text here and there would provide the basic context, many players of Vanilla and Classic WoW feel the world itself is a character. Distinctly lacking direct acknowledgement most of the time, the many secrets of Azeroth's story can be intuited by subtextually charged level design. While the Burning Crusade would mostly follow this trend, only providing a larger scope to the expansion with the acknowledgement of key players along the way, in the world of Outland, it still adhered to much of the environmental storytelling of its predecessor. To abandon this strategy would be suicide. The world of an MMO is arguably the most important aspect, and substituting that for a focused narrative would barely make WoW feel, well, WoW. Not only did Wrath of the Lich King introduce a far more traditional RPG story in terms of narrative, but it also would be heralded by many as the greatest time in all of WoW. This transition wasn't seen as a betrayal of the old way, but an alternative to the expression of plot the series is known for. Games like Guild Wars and its sequel Guild Wars 2 would surpass the storytelling style and ability of World of Warcraft, but that transition in style of WoW was an interesting mix-up that needed to happen. The Metroid franchise knows this very, very well. Super Metroid is enshrined as a masterpiece and the pinnacle of environmental storytelling in 1994. It pushed the medium forward in ways that we've never thought possible, and its legacy would live for decades prior. Critics then, and still today, argue that Metroid 3 is a masterclass of subtext, the likes of which other designers have never since been able to replicate. So what is Metroid Fusion supposed to do here? What is Metroid 4 supposed to bring to the table after, God, Super Metroid? How do you follow up one of the greatest games of all time? How do you not immediately just get overshadowed by a member of your own franchise? Twice. Storytelling in Metroid Fusion is very different. The 2-minute intros are a thing of the past, as Metroid Fusion takes the duration into double digits with loads of cutscenes, context, twists, and, yeah, a long intro for a Metroid game. For many players, this is a massive turnoff of the series, but honestly, it's fine. Metroid Fusion opens right after Super as Samus returns to the Galactic Federation. Little did she know that her eradication of the Metroids in Metroid 2 would cause a very new and very real threat to show up. Samus becomes infected with the X parasite, the natural prey of the Metroids. Since there are seemingly no Metroids left to feed on the X parasite, the virus infects Samus, causing her to fall ill, thus leading to Samus crashing her ship and almost dying. Saved by the Galactic Federation, the surgery Samus undergoes isn't perfect, but she's infused with Metroid DNA, granting many of the benefits and detriments of the species. While the Metroid DNA protects Samus's immune system from the virus, much of her suit was way too integrated with her body to remove it, leaving her stuck with much of her suit remaining attached to her. The BSL station, a research lab, has an emergency arise and Samus is requested to check the scene, with a new ship that looks pretty cool, and a new operating artificial intelligence named Adam leading the mission. Samus lands on the BSL station to investigate what all the fuss is about. The BSL is a very different environment than what we're normally used to exploring in the Metroid series. The labyrinthian tunnels of Zebes, the sprawling den-like caverns of SR-388, they both gave off this alien but natural environment. While still science fiction, the worlds were believable, and that can't go unpraised. Now, does that level design work for this new setting for Fusion? No. The BSL is man-made. The pathways through these halls feel more logical than natural. This shift in environment was a welcomed breath of fresh air that I honestly didn't even know I needed. Isn't that a great feeling when a game gives you something new that you didn't really know you wanted and it turns out to be such an obvious choice? Metroid Fusion might be Metroid 4, but in many ways it almost feels like a spin-off. While Super Metroid uses the level design to guide the players, Fusion instead tells the player the exact room where to go and sometimes even tricks on how to get there. This definitely takes some time to get used to. When you arrive in a navigation room, Samus's AI Adam will usually give you some sort of info dump as to what is going on next, before then telling Samus to go kill a boss in this particular room or to go to yet another navigation room. In terms of a narrative, Metroid Fusion is a lot like Ocarina of Time. The Zelda games up to this point were largely free-roaming. While Link to the Past was generally linear, there was always such a large expanse to explore at the player's whim. With Ocarina of Time, the structure focused way more on story than just level design. Ocarina of Time is often considered one of the most important video games ever, so it's clear that that formula can work. I say and bring all this up because honestly, it's so easy to get lost in this argument. This narrative decision would be hated by many players. It would be accused of insulting the player's intelligence, which I just don't think it's true. It's argued that this decision was made because of lazy or bad developers, which also just doesn't make sense. Even I, right now, have spent far too long talking about this point, but it's kind of important to discuss because it is just so different. But that's it. It's just different. There are plenty of other changes that Fusion goes with that we can take a look at now before we get too far. First off, is that Samus can now ledge grab. Talk about ruining the whole franchise. The lore explanation is that since her current suit is so much lighter than her normal power suit, she can now lift herself up from a ledge with one hand. Honestly, did we really need this reasoning? Samus has a power suit. It's science fiction. She's like a robot, basically. You don't really need to explain why she can lift herself a little now. We never questioned her strength. The change is nice, honestly, though, I'll give it that. Super Metroid had some incredible platforming for sure, and I really loved that about the game. This ledge grab, though, just makes the momentum feel so much smoother as you navigate the world. It turns everything from a platforming section to a game being able to dictate which type of environment you're currently in, and whether or not this particular sequence is going to be more platforming based or action based. It gives the designers some freedom, and it makes continual navigation through the BSL very buttery smooth. The ledge grab would be continued in Metroid Zero Mission 3 years later, as well as the AM2R fan game via a new upgrade called the Power Grab. It's also in Samus Returns, which will be the next video, so we're getting there. I will talk about it then too. Judging by all of the gameplay we've seen in Metroid Dread so far, it seems to have a ledge grab as well. As weird as it might be to say, I actually think the ledge grab might be the best gameplay mechanic introduced in Fusion. It's a small change, but it goes such a long way in smoothing out movement in a Metroid game. Another change is the health and ammo pickups. Since the X-Parasite has taken over the BSL and infected the living organisms, Fusion thematically alters the way these pickups are displayed. You'll learn very early on that the X-Parasites can replicate the look and even the memories of the creatures that it infects. This will become even more important later on with the introduction of the SAX, but as you defeat the enemies aboard the station, the X-Parasites that are duplicating them will pop out and appear before you. There are different colors of parasites, and these variations dictate the type of pickup that they will be. Some give health back, some give missiles, some give more health. You know, the drill. You can gather the parasites by jumping into them, and Samus will then absorb them since she's immune to the virus, like a bit of a god, kind of, in this universe. Not only is this a great thematic way to change the health and ammo pickups, but it also adds a new gameplay mechanic, and I'm all about that gameplay. See, if you take too long to gather the X-Parasites, they'll wander around and form into another enemy. You have to defeat the enemy again and quickly run to grab that parasite, or do this repeatedly ad infinitum. Where this becomes brilliant is when you're fighting multiple enemies at once, because it's no longer just a matter of taking them out one by one. No, you may take one guy out, but if you take too long to get the parasite, then you're back to fighting multiple mobs. In order to stay ahead, you are forced to play a little risky, and more specifically, you have to play aggressive. By killing an enemy, outmaneuvering the other to get the X-Parasite so the first victim doesn't respawn, and then taking out the second guy, it all feels good, and this seriously is brilliant. By forcing players to make quick and risky plays, it means the player might make more mistakes and get hit. In order to prevent this, when the player is introduced to multiple enemies, they now have to do one of two things, or a combination of both. First, they have to come up with a strategy on how to take out the two enemies near the same time to absorb the parasites very quickly together back to back. Second is to become more skilled mechanically in order to outplay the enemies and take them out one at a time. Third option is to just be bad and to brute force it, but I mean, that just doesn't work well in Fusion. By encouraging and essentially requiring risky and aggressive play, this forces the player to change and adjust to even simple situations. Other games in future would adopt this philosophy. Control, for example, forces the player to bounce in and out of close-range combat to gather health pickups against very strong enemies, tuning even the most basic of combat encounters into a strategic exercise. The title that most famously adopted this idea has to be Hollow Knight, which requires you to get into the fray constantly in order to stay healed up. This constant seesaw of risk and reward twists something so basic into something continually interesting. There's a philosophy of less is more. We've all heard that phrase, I'm sure, but it applies also to game design. The whole mechanic behind these X-Parasites is simple, but complex. It's like adding a dash mechanic in a game like Celeste. Think about the puzzle potential with and without a dash. It's so simple, so small, a single button press that changes the entire way that you interact with the world around you. When you also consider that the enemies of Metroid Fusion are the hardest hitting of the entire 2D franchise to this point, the risk becomes that much more. The whole strategy, mechanical skill, or both, this conundrum becomes even more important, and it allows the player to shine in their own unique ways. It lets you, the player, imprint onto the game the things that you are good at, the way you like to play, in order to overcome each challenge of Fusion. Which there is, by the way. This is easily the hardest 2D Metroid so far, outside the original NES Metroid, and I love just how much more it expects out of the player while not actually being a traditionally hard game, so to speak. It's challenging, but not hard. For example, I game overed in Zero Mission basically only at the end in the Zero Suit Samus section. I don't ever remember dying in AM2R, and I died maybe once or twice in Super Metroid. However, in Metroid Fusion, I died about a dozen times, and it felt good. Metroid Fusion does kind of fall on its face here though. While the previous games gave the player loads of freedom and let you really explore around, Fusion doesn't. It holds your hand tightly. It makes sure that you're not a bad boy and that you don't cross a corner you're not supposed to yet. It lets you know when to come out of that corner, and there's no questions about it. So you'd expect with this new rigid structure that maybe it would at least get all the pacing and the story beats down right? Right? You knocked it off right now. You know where this goes. When I say there's no freedom in Fusion, I really mean it. While there does exist moments to go off and grab an upgrade here or there, even that just feels so limited in creativity compared to the last 3 games that I have played for this retrospective series. Narratively too, you can really tell that Fusion is trying new things. It's good to try something new for sure, but you can really tell they aren't good at it yet. And
that's no good.
Let's take the SAX, for example. This creature is an X-Parasite reconstruction of Samus Aran. It is a specimen that left her body while she was still in her full power suit at full power from the end of Super Metroid. It is you at full strength. I absolutely love clone characters in games that you have to face. Being on the same playing field as them, knowing all of their skills beforehand, fighting yourself is just such a cool concept, and one that Nintendo tends to do extremely well. Look at Dark Link, Dark Pit, Dark Samus, the SAX, Dupless in Thousand Year Door, and Dark Bowser. Here's the thing with the SAX though. The intention behind this character is clearly to set up a horror vibe. The music when it shows up, the slow movement, the lifeless actions, just all fit into Nintendo attempting to create a horror monster. Even the first time you see the SAX as the elevator lowers Samus, the SAX comes busting through the wall with nothing to stop it. However, there's a serious problem here. Remember when I just said that it's the first time you see the SAX? Well, put a hard emphasis on that you, because Samus didn't see her there. You did, but not Samus. Isn't that a little weird for a Metroid game? Now, I know what you're thinking. Okay, I don't actually know what you're thinking, but here's the thing. The first time the SAX arrives is such a pivotal moment, and yet it's also the first time the player sees something that Samus herself isn't aware of. For the first time in the series, the player has more information than Samus. And it's just kind of odd. I know a lot of people are gonna think that I'm overblowing this, but this disconnect, this break of immersion, has not happened once in the first 3 games of this retrospective, but it does happen here in Fusion several times. That is not good. And it's not even just with the SAX either. While the moments at the SAX and gameplay sequences are really good, as you have to slowly but surely outmaneuver them because that thing will kill you, and that feeling of dread, nice one, is truly capitalized here. Fusion misses massively though with these cutscene moments. There's another point right before you enter Sector 6 where this super evil bad businessman asks the Atom computer if Samus knows anything yet and to monitor her closely. Why show us that? Why separate us from Samus now of all times? With how much narrative this game has, it just doesn't make sense to keep the player and the avatar in such different pools of understanding. There's no need. Let us discover secrets of the lab on our own. Let us explore the evil side of the Federation that we already know it's bad by this point, guys. This isn't a secret. This disconnect is just so odd. Metroid is so famous for its subtext and the environmental storytelling, and then all of a sudden, the series throws it out to make sure that you know something's going on, and there are bad people behind it. Oh, really? Well, thank you for telling me. If I ever have to use my brain to even muster a thought, then I thought I might have to go numb. What is a Samus? It's quite honestly no surprise that so many players make the claim that Fusion insults their intelligence. While I think it's more of just an error in narrative conveyance, yeah, it definitely does give off this vibe that you might be too stupid to not notice something more is happening here. Don't forget about the bad guys. By the way, it's the Federation. I'm not sure if you heard that. Let me remind you a few times throughout the game. Yes, the Federation is bad. Yeah, still the Federation. A lot of this is also attributed to the AI Adam. Metroid Other M is notoriously hated, and one of the many reasons is because Samus's superior, Adam Malkovich, the same Adam that the AI is named after, who died on the mission of Other M. Spoilers, I guess, if you actually wanted to play that game for God knows what reason. Might as well play Final Fantasy VIII while you're at it if you want true misery, you little masochist. Other M Adam dictates to Samus where to go, when to do it, and when she can activate parts of her suit. Fans hated how Adam is basically in full control of your progression, and it gave the experience of a very artificial feeling that's extremely contrary to the Metroid theme. While Fusion is nowhere near as intrusive, it's kinda pretty annoying, actually. Adam 100% dictates your progress in the entire game. He tells you where to go, when to do it, and where to get a particular upgrade and when it's okay to do so. Does that sound a little familiar? He'll handle the locks on the doors that you can't get around, so this AI quite literally dictates your progress in the game. In the previous games, the bosses and upgrades were stumbled upon as if just a moment of exploration throughout this alien planet that you're roaming on. While it's clearly artificial to a point, since, well, it's a video game, the progress itself felt like the results of the player, not the game. Fusion genuinely throws it out the window really hard, and every step forward is allowed, halted, or turned by Adam specifically, not Samus. Well, until near the end, but we'll have to come back to that since there's a lot to talk about actually at the end of the game.
Now, a lot of people will critique a gameplay mechanic or a gameplay element, and that's it. They'll leave it there. But that's not a bad thing necessarily. It's actually not the job of the critic to provide the designer solutions or workarounds. It is their job, their role, so to speak, to express how they feel when interacting with the product. It is the job of the designer to parse out the why from that feeling. That is that role. But I like to go a little further. Sometimes it really is just important to express how you feel or ask questions like, why is Final Fantasy VIII so bad? Well, probably because it's not Legend of Dragoon, but everyone knows that. Anyway, I do like to offer solutions and at least discuss the design a little bit further because there's a point here in Fusion that has the potential, but it ends up being very disappointing. It really should have been something super cool. You're gonna have to forgive me. Cool was supposed to be a pun for a joke that was about to happen, but I forgot to set up the context. There's a point in the game where the X-Parasites start to try and outsmart you. Up until this point, you've seen yellow, green, and red parasites throughout the levels. Upon entering Sector 6, the Adam computer warns Samus of a new blue parasite that emulates the effect of Samus's Ice Beam. Since the vaccine Samus was given is based on Metroid DNA, she is now actually weak to the effects of cold, just like the Metroids. The X-Parasites are trying to adapt and stop Samus, which has some pretty cool implications to the game. You're warned to keep an eye out for the blue parasites and to avoid them at all costs. Now, what does this setup sound like to you? I can tell you what I was expecting after getting this briefing, and honestly, I was so impressed with how clever Metroid Fusion was gonna be. I imagined that now, when I killed an enemy in this sector, there would be a chance that a blue X-Parasite would pop out, and absorbing that pickup might hurt and freeze me, leaving me vulnerable to other enemies. This would brilliantly shake up the gameplay formula that had already been established for some time now. It would force me to slow things down, as I would have to be more careful and methodical with how I deal with enemies in the area. The blue parasite could be the perfect pace breaker that games need throughout their playtime. For the past couple hours of gameplay, I've learned to quickly grab the enemy parasites so that they don't reform, which we discussed earlier on in the video, but for now, even just a small portion of the game, we'd be forced to break that muscle memory and become more attentive, thus ensuring that this adventure wouldn't get too stale. I wouldn't be building this up so much if it actually happened, so bring on the disappointment!
The blue parasites, the creatures that Adam told us were responding and adapting to Samus's presence, they end up being nothing more than just an enemy that nudges Samus and freezes her.
Gee, wow. So creative.
While that point really falls flat in the imaginative department, there does come some really cool, interesting moments later on that the developers should be really proud of. Like the bosses. For real, Fusion by far has the best boss design in any of the 2D Metroid games to this point. I've also played Samus Returns as of the recording of this video, and yes, I'd argue it's better than Samus Returns. Part 2 of this retrospective series was AM2R, and the bosses that appear on SR388 has made me appreciate their connection to Fusion way more than the first time that I played this game. The context that Metroid 2 provides is incredibly critical to understanding the full scope of the BSL station and the X-Parasite. These X-Parasites start to mimic some incredibly powerful creatures, and their encounters are super fun. This is also such a brilliant way to reuse and expand upon previous boss design without it coming off as cheap, since there's a contextual purpose for something like Arachnus showing back up, who serves as a very awesome early boss, by the way. There's a brilliant moment where you find a frozen Ridley that crumbles as X-Parasites leave the scene. This sequence comes immediately after you learn that the X-Parasites can clone other creatures, while the eventual Ridley encounter is yet again just another spam the rocket button fight. The sheer size of his sprite is kinda cool. It's a mechanically uninteresting fight, but it's more of a spectacle than any of the Ridley fights thus far. Well, until Samus Returns. His sprite is actually so large that it causes the game to lag. Frame drops aren't cool. But if the frame drops are happening because something is just so dang big, it's oddly kind of additional to the spectacle of it all. I absolutely adore good boss fights in video games. And when we're not done talking about the bosses yet though, because I still have way more to talk about, how about Zazabi? The design and context to its environment feels very thematic and accurate. I also love how the core of the encounter is that you essentially have to put yourself in harm's way to damage the boss. When it tries to jump on Samus to suck her up, it's the only way that you can actually hurt Zazabi. This really forces the player to develop some reaction timing. It also expands further on that opportunistic gameplay that the X-Parasites encourage as pickups that I mentioned at the start of this video. Something I didn't realize until way late into the game is also how many of these bosses replicate the items that their X-cores drop when defeated. For example, Zazabi's Core X gives you the high jump and the spring ball. The entire encounter is about a boss jumping around and trying to land on Samus. How did I not notice that? The Yakuza spider later on is entirely based on its continual aerial movement. The thing almost never lands on the ground, and, well, what a surprise that its Core X drops the space jump, the ability to jump indefinitely in the air. How about Ceres, who eventually speeds up and charges around the room lightning fast? Yes, the speed booster. That one was actually obvious, and I didn't notice it the first time. I'm really dumb. My second favorite boss in the game has to be Nightmare. This thing just feels, I don't know, it feels wrong. That might be the best descriptor that I can come up with. The whole encounter just feels like it's straight out of a horror game. The creature is completely synthetic, developed by the BSL as a gravitational weapon.
Wait. I thought the BSL was doing everything on the station and using the Metroid's power, DNA, and energy for peaceful gains to help benefit humanity. Are you telling me that this whole time the Federation has been using that to develop weapons? Egad, I for one am shocked.
I mentioned earlier that Nightmare is all about gravity manipulation, and your movement through the lair is key to success of this fight. Defeating this monster yields the gravity suit, yet again leading to the theme that the boss's mechanics will tease the reward you're about to receive. This idea is actually something that would be yet again used in Metroid Prime 2 Echoes, where different guardians would represent the item that you would get. However, it's way more forced in Prime 2 with literal bosses like Spider Guardian yielding the Spider Ball, and the encounter taking place entirely around this like one single mechanic, and it just feels a bit gimmicky. Fusion handles this way more organically. Like Arachnus has multiple different attacks and mechanics, while the core of the encounter is about his movement as a ball, thus revealing the Morph Ball as the reward. But it isn't exclusively around that one element of the fight, it's much more, and it's only the core of these encounters that tease the end result, or maybe even the theme of the encounters. The bosses in Fusion are also way harder than anything I've run into thus far, outside maybe the tester in AM2R. Fusion in general is actually way harder than Metroid 1 through 3, and it's such a nice breath of fresh air. I absolutely love these games, but honestly, my favorite time playing them has always been the second playthrough on a hard mode. Like Zero Mission does this especially well. The bosses in Zero Mission are insanely easy, but put them on hard mode and you start to notice that these fights have actual mechanics. I just really need to express how good the Fusion bosses are, especially compared to everything else before it. In all 3 videos leading up to Fusion, I've been very critical of the boss design. It's this weird thing where the encounters aren't necessarily bad, but they're so boring. While a few exceptions do exist, like Chorizo from AM2R or the Mother Brain encounter at the end of Super Metroid, most just don't engage the player in any meaningful way. Metroid Fusion really makes up for this with some really damn good boss design. The additional layer of challenge only makes their impact that much greater, and that feeling of success is something that I hadn't really had in the series up until now. I'm recording this before Metroid Dread drops, and I'm breaking the fourth wall a bit by referencing Samus Returns here that I haven't fully published the video on yet, but Metroid Fusion has the best 2D boss design in any Metroid game by far. This is what I've been hoping for. This is yet another way to express that feeling of power and growth that Samus goes through. It's another piece of the arc of Samus Aran, and it's done through gameplay. Remember how I mentioned how the Adam AI basically runs this game? Well, he himself actually gets a little bit of a character arc. First, we learn that Adam is short for Adam Malkovich, Samus's former commanding officer. He wasn't just her superior though, he was also a bit of a mentor to Samus. Samus has a strong fondness for Adam that seems inscribed with respect. She honors his leadership and methods while also being her own individual. You know, like a good character. Other M would come along and twist this into an awkward relationship that feels more forced than the jokes that I make in my own videos. Second, a small detail that's dropped at some point in Fusion is that Adam would often refer to Samus as Lady. This could mean a lot of things, and the game never really delves too much further. Was it a sign of sexism, a phrase to assert power over Samus? Probably not. What we do learn is that it seemed to be a phrase of acknowledgement or endearment, leading to the fact that Samus was most likely the only female at that level of her squad. We know for certain that it sticks out to Samus and she doesn't seem upset by it. Third, we do eventually stray off of the path in Fusion and go against Adam's wishes for our mission. This is brilliant. 1, it capitalizes on the player's frustration with Adam's rigid layout, and 2 is that it might share a bit of an idea of what happened between Adam and Samus in her backstory. Perhaps this whole event that happens near the end of the game of going against Adam's wishes is a bit of a metaphor for the actual circumstances behind Adam Malkovich and Samus Aran. All of these events end up leading to a moment where we, and Samus by extension, disobey the Adam AI orders and wishes, but what led us up to this point? You see, up until near the end of the game, Adam will open up security locks that can go through certain doors. However, eventually we'll hit a point where things kinda don't go as planned. After you receive the gravity suit, you have to stumble your way through a lot of hidden passages. Many of these hidden tunnels are only discoverable by quite literally hugging the wall as a morph ball. Do you remember that wall in Super Metroid that everyone complains about, that everyone hates, that everyone talks about is a glaring problem that destroys Super Metroid's level design? Well, Metroid Fusion has 3, count them, 3 moments exactly like that. Is it really that big of a deal?
It was around this time that I noticed something. My ability to critically think, to problem solve, to address issues and puzzles that were right in front of me, it all started to diminish. I was getting worse at it. And this is the first time in the series I had ever felt this. And after some reflection, I think I know why. So much of the game is so linear to the extent that you very rarely have to think. Even a lot of the upgrades are hidden in a way that's so obvious, and energy tanks are given to you almost as if they're heart containers from a Zelda game. You just really don't have to think until the very end of the game, and then when I needed that critical thinking, when I needed that problem solving the most, it vanished. I made that joke just for you.
Eventually, we make our way deeper into the BSL station, and oh boy, here we go again with the Metroids. Looks like that cloning was successful again, and here we are. Again. It's interesting that there are so few enemies down here though. So few X-parasites until I remembered, oh yeah, the Metroids are the natural predators of the X. How neat is that the enemy layout kind of fits the lore of the world? Great little touch there. Exploring this lab, you can even see all of the development stages of the Metroid. My first time through this game, I gotta be honest, I had absolutely no clue what any of this meant. I thought it was kind of like fan art or something. But now that I've experienced Metroid 2, it's great to see this attention to detail. While we're off and exploring, something starts to happen. The SAX, the Samus X clone, shows up and starts using its power to murder the Metroids. As the SAX is attacking its predator, an escape sequence triggers and it's done. Okay? This is where the Adam AI starts to get upset with us since we've gone off the designated path, and it declares that we're gonna need to get punished somehow. We're also reinforced that the Metroid research was strictly for peaceful purposes, by the way.
Or to be used as a weapon.
After the worst section in any 2D Metroid ever, where the only way to heal is to grind up for 10 minutes in a single hallway, we're confronted by Adam again, and we're told to abort the mission now? After all this time? Really? You just want us to leave? You really expect this far in that we're just gonna walk out? Really? Apparently the Federation has found a new potential for the X-Parasite, and they themselves will be returning to the station to sort it all out. Oh, wow. I knew the Galactic Federation was selfish and a bit slimy, but I had no clue just how f***ing stupid they were. We also find out that all of our suit upgrades were intentionally held back from us so that way we wouldn't destroy the SAX since the Federation wants it alive. Since we're a threat now to its new mission's success, the Adam AI locks us up in a room so we cannot sabotage the mission further.
It was at this point that I had a bit of an epiphany. You see, up until here, everything about the game, the narrative pacing, the upgrade structure, the reward layouts, everything was so synthetic. It was so gamey. It felt so arbitrated by human hands. Little did I know just how intentional this was. We weren't supposed to get this feeling of restriction and confinement because of the developers. We were supposed to feel that from the Federation. They have been running the show. They have been restricting you and pinning you down. And that hatred, that moment that we finally get to explore and be free, is that much more satisfying. This moment where Adam locks us in the room, this isn't just meant for the player to break free from the hold of Adam. It's not meant to just break free from the hold of the designers, but also the Galactic Federation as a whole. This is such a cool idea. It's very meta, and I think that it's a very risky move from Nintendo. And while I think they missed the mark, I think the conveyance was just off. Despite that though, this was something so cool to explore, and I'm really glad the designers did explore this idea. I'm at least glad they got to explore something because we definitely didn't.
Eventually, the Adam computer lets us out after we appeal to his humanity. What? Samus decides she's done with this and gonna come up with a new plan. In a moment of brilliance of how much can I screw up the Federation, she decides she's gonna lower the orbit of the station into the atmosphere of planet SR388, the Metroid homeworld, then blow up the station close to the planet so that all of the X-Parasites burn up in the atmosphere, and then SR388 blows up with the entire space station, thus removing the Metroids and the X-Parasites from existence.
You know, Samus is starting to get really good at this whole genocide thing. Our hero, ladies and gentlemen.
On our way through the station, we bump into the SAX once again. This is my favorite boss fight in Fusion, and it's a perfect mirror matchup. All of the rules that apply to Samus also apply to the SAX, and vice versa. It can also be pretty damn hard. Any fight where you and the enemy are essentially evenly matched is an easy win in my book. Screw attacking around, the Spazer and Ice Beams going off, it's such a fun skirmish. Thankfully, Samus has a couple new moves since Super Metroid, and we overcome the SAX and oh god! What is that? The parasite mutates into a crazed state and acts almost mindless. After some struggle, it's eventually defeated. The X-Parasite isn't absorbed, but it just kind of goes away? Okay. This leads to another escape sequence, which is thankfully way better than the last one, and it also means that, yep, we're definitely at the end of the game. As we rush through the space station to our ship so we can leave, we quickly realize that, there's actually no tension here, like, at all. There are no enemies. No screen effects to sell that the station is crashing into a planet. Nothing. The clock is literally running, and that's the only form of tension. Really? Considering where we've come, especially both escape sequences in Super Metroid, this is by far the most boring of all the escape sections that I've ever explored in this entire retrospective thus far. It's a bit of a shame, but also, how? How did it get this bad? We finally arrive at our ship to escape and, oh God! That's a big fella. This Omega Metroid comes out of nowhere and one hits you and knocks you to 1 HP. Ah, cool. Good fight. The SA-X Parasite shows up and tries to take it out itself, bringing back the Metroid X rivalry. Unfortunately, the Omega Metroid starts to win out. The X-Parasite isn't stupid though, and seeing self-preservation as its only available route left, the Parasite allows itself to be absorbed by Samus, which superpowers us against this monstrous enemy. This fight is fine. Nothing really to write home about, but it's a good encounter. My only really beef here is that, well, we've done this before. Okay, imagine this checklist for just a moment and let me know if any of this sounds familiar at all. 1. The boss is an enemy that we fought and beaten in a previous game. 2. The enemy is a bipedal monster with arms and a big head. 3. Samus is hit by a powerful attack that leaves her near death. 4. Something that was once a threat now comes in to save Samus and attempts to kill the boss. 5. The creature fails. 6. Samus is given superpower from that creature that tried to save her. 7. You beat the boss with the superpower gifted to you by the now gone creature. I wonder what that sounds like. This Omega Metroid fight it's completely wasted opportunity. The final boss has some serious case of imposter syndrome and basically nothing more than a copy-paste of the final encounter of the game just before it. Like, imagine if the ending of Majora's Mask was literally a Ganondorf meets Ganon fight like an Ocarina of Time. We've done this already, but we've also done it better. The end of Super Metroid is filled with nostalgia from Mother Brain returning, but also the baby Metroid itself, which introduces an emotional element. That desire for vengeance that the player feels after the baby dies is legendary. The X-Parasite, though, just doesn't give some heartfelt sacrifice or anything. It allowed itself to be absorbed. It arguably isn't even dead. It's just living inside Samus. While the Omega Metroid is clearly trying to pull on some of that nostalgia as well from Metroid 2, what could have been way better would have been the Queen Metroid there trying to stop the ship from crashing. The intelligence of the X-Parasite and the memories of the Queen Metroid could have worked, as both the X and Metroids wouldn't want Samus to complete this mission and exterminate both species. That symbiotic relationship would have been brilliant. Imagine two opposing forces teaming up to stop Samus, kind of exposing Samus as arguably the bad guy for trying to commit genocide again. Anyway, we leave our ship and the station explodes, eradicating SR-388. Both the Metroids and the X-Parasites are wiped out. Samus also doesn't just go against the Federation's orders here, she has sabotaged arguably their largest project. Considering every game starts with Samus hired by the Federation, this is a huge narrative step in the franchise, and I am really excited to see where this leads in Metroid Dread. All in all, Metroid Fusion is kind of weird. The limited exploration, the constant interruptions, the first ever disconnection between Samus and player, it definitely isn't a typical Metroid game. In fact, many may argue that it's a bad Metroid game. If you enjoy Metroid for its exploration, discovery, and subtext, then Fusion is not the game for you, for sure. If you enjoy Metroid for environmental storytelling and for you, the player, dictating the progress path of the experience, then Fusion is still not that type of game for you. What it is, though, is an extremely polished mechanical experience. This is the snappiest gameplay at this point so far. While AM2R competes, it's also important to understand that AM2R came out 15 years after Metroid Fusion. Fusion just feels so good to play. The increase in challenge also adds a whole extra level to the experience that would be brought back again with the series in the hard mode difficulty of Zero Mission a few years later, and also returning with Samus Returns, since that game is arguably even harder than Fusion. The bosses are the best in the series by a long shot, and the new upgrades push the series in a direction that I think is really cool. Metroid Fusion is very different. It's the most divisive entry for a reason. While I think much of what it's trying to do doesn't necessarily succeed, I have to praise it for trying loads of new things. I really like the possibility of the direction moving forward. The final 15% or so of Fusion goes to show that you absolutely can have both a narrative alongside environmental storytelling and subtext. They do not have to be mutually exclusive. We also see that challenge should absolutely be more involved in Metroid, and Fusion specifically exposed so many new ideas to the formula that it deserves to be acknowledged for that. The Metroidvania genre has blown up in recent years. Hollow Knight, Axiom Verge, Bloodstained, Ori, Blasphemous, heck, even Blaster Master has moved to a Metroidvania style. While Super Metroid perfected the Metroid formula in many, many ways. Fusion helped push it into an environment that was new and uncharted. It pushed the bounds of the formula, and while it didn't succeed in every case, it was important to take that step, not only for Metroid, but for the entire genre it takes part in. It's like Ocarina of Time. The formula is different now, and in some ways this title missed, but the series without question is infinitely better from the lessons learned. Playing Fusion today has made me even more excited for Metroid Dread, and more in love with the series than I ever thought possible. And from a narrative and lore perspective, Fusion has made me more excited for Metroid 5 than anything to this point. And that deserves a lot of praise.
Honestly, Metroid Fusion is not a game I'm excited to replay anytime soon. What it is, though, is a very important and very solid step from Nintendo to push the Metroid franchise into new space. They did some really interesting and really risky things here. I mean, just the fact that they, at the end of the game, have attempted to wipe out the Metroids and the X-Parasites in one blow forces the franchise into a realm that no one can really predict. And that's pretty cool. Not many games have the balls to do that. All we have left now before Dread is Samus Returns. Thank you for making it this far in the video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye!